Behind every amazing flavor is an amazing human who has perfected their craft. Welcome to Flavors Unknown, a behind-the-scenes look at new flavors and the chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders who create them, with your host, Emmanuel.
Hello there. Beginning of March, COVID-19 hit the US and had a dramatic impact on the restaurant industry. This very sad situation had a ripple effect in the whole restaurant supply chain and their purveyors. In Ohio, west of Cleveland, a family farm was directly impacted. The Chef's Garden farm has made their business in supplying unique vegetable, herbs, roots, blossom varieties to top chefs across the country. My guest today is farmer Lee Jones from the Chef's Garden. I am your host, Emmanuel Roche. Welcome to another episode of Flavors Unknown. Thank you for listening today. If you are new to the show, I have been in the food industry for more than 20 years in Europe and in the US, and every other week I have a conversation with trending chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders from different regions of the US. You will find the show notes from this episode on the website flavorsunknown.com. Let's welcome Farmer Lee Jones to the show. Hi, Farmer Lee Jones, and welcome to the podcast Flavors Unknown. I'm really pleased to have you as a guest this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. So, how are you doing? I want to ask you, and how bad is the situation for you guys, since the beginning of the pandemic?
Well, we're doing okay as far as health and safety. Food safety has always been really important to us on the farm, but we're doing We've tripled our sterilization methodologies, and everybody's getting temperatures checked and lab coats and hairnets. But it's affected us in a grand way. Over the last 37 years, 100% of our revenue has come from working directly with chefs throughout the United States and some internationally. We ship some over to Hong Kong and Dubai and other countries. But of course, the coronavirus hit and all the restaurants were shut down. Obviously, there are some that are trying to, make things happen with carry out and delivery, but that's a pretty small percentage. It's definitely affected us in a grand way.
Yeah, so it's definitely a very difficult time for you guys because everything, as you just said, and everything that you do is with the chefs in mind. So can you maybe take us back into like the whole adventure of the Chef's Garden and how this adventure started with the chefs?
Well, interestingly enough, it kind of feels like we're kind of back in time. Back in time. My father was in commercial vegetable production. This is an amazing microclimate. We're 2.9 miles inland from Lake Erie, and Lake Erie is the shallowest of all the Great Lakes, and it's also the warmest. And the soil that we're on is all old lake bottom. And at one point, there were over 330 vegetable growers in this county. Now, as near as we can figure, it was the largest concentration of truck farmers, vegetable farmers of any county in the United States. Now, you can say, wait a minute. You can go out to California and you can find counties that are 100% agriculture from north, south to east to west, but they're owned by 30 farmers that each have 30,000 acres. These were small family farms. A large farm at that time would have been 100 acres because that's about all one family could take care of. And they were called truck farmers. And what that meant was that as soon in the spring that you could plant, you started planting, and you planted every day until you got to the fall where you were sure that when you planted that it probably wasn't going to make it unless you got a really late fall. And so if you can, let's just say hypothetically, you started planting April 1st, and on greens and radishes and lettuces, you could move now to May 1st and you start harvesting. So every day you're still planting, but then from May 1st on, you're harvesting what's ready, you're washing it, you're packing it, you're loading it in a truck, and you're taking it to a farmer's market. Entirely different farmer's market than what we visualize today when I say farmer's market.
So when you're talking about that time, can you just specify a little bit what years you are referring to here?
I'm referring to like in the 1930s and the 1940s. Cleveland has amazing ethnic diversity, which is one of the reasons that makes Cleveland so cool, because there's so much depth of history and culture. And if you think about Jewish and Slovakian and Hungarian and Russian and Italian and on and on and on, and every one of those immigrants that came into this region moved into communities, and they had their own neighborhoods, and they had their own grocery stores, and they had their own grocery store buyers. And if you think about the hundreds of family-owned grocery stores that existed, and this is before roads and refrigeration had really developed to the point where there was really any outside competition. This is pre-chain grocery stores. And so those farmers would go in, and by about 10 or 11 o'clock at night, midnight, hundreds of grocery store buyers would meet at farmers markets, and the farmers would develop rapport with each of those grocery store buyers, and they would grow specific things for them. And then the farmers would go home, and then they would be home by 2 o'clock in the morning. They'd sleep for a few hours and then get up and harvest again and plant again. And they were truck farmers. So they really did quite well. They had a captive audience. They didn't have a lot of outside competition. But as roads and refrigeration, by the mid 40s and the 50s, as roads and refrigeration started getting better, then larger farms could do it on a more efficient scale, and the economy of scale kicked in. And one by one, those family-owned grocery stores were pushed out. I mean, if your listeners can think about and go back to their childhood and think about their hometown and think about the family-owned grocery stores that were perhaps there but are no longer there. It's the same thing that happened with the family farms, because one by one, those family farms couldn't compete with the larger volumes.
I mean, it disappear with industrialization, yeah.
That's exactly right. Now, my father was working cooperatively. He didn't have a co-op, but he worked with about 65 other growers from our community. And he invested in hydrocooling, packaging, palletization, bundling, and was competing with larger farms from Florida, from Phoenix, from Arizona, from California. And they competed pretty good for, from the period of about mid 60s to the early 80s. And they packed all under one label. I can remember my dad loading 10 to 12 semi-loads of produce, palletized produce a day in the summer season, in the period between the mid 60s and early 80s. One by one, those 65 growers continued to go out, just opposite of what we're experiencing today, lowest interest rates in the history of the United States right now. They're talking about even some 1% money and 1 to 3%.
It was like 15, 20? It was what?
It actually hit 22% in the early 80s. My parents got wrapped up in that, and they had a very devastating hailstorm, and it wiped out all the crops. They couldn't repay the loans. And when I was 19 years old, I stood shoulder to shoulder with my mom and dad, my brother and sister, all of our neighbors, all of our competitors, everybody that were there to celebrate our failure. And they auctioned every single tractor off, every single piece of equipment, my mother's car, and our home. And we literally
about crisis. That was like really you hit the bottom, at that time. And the family did.
Yeah. It was. I can't even fully describe the pain of seeing my parents work so hard. Non-drinkers, non-smokers, hadn't missed a day at church in 25 years. And at 19, I'm the oldest in the family. And to stand there with them and see their entire life's work be auctioned off a piece at a time it was a devastating day, devastating period for sure.
And so what happened? Because they had to go back and selling at the farmers markets, at that time.
Yeah, I could tell you stories you wouldn't even believe. I mean, if you know anything about a farmer, they never throw anything away, and part of that goes back to kind of the Depression days. And there was a point where gas was rationed, and you couldn't buy a new car because all the steel was being used to make army tanks. And so there were periods of time where you couldn't buy a vehicle. You had to patch up the old one. And so my dad never threw anything away. And actually at the sheriff's sale, the auction, the foreclosure, there were 3 trucks that were so banged up and ragtag that nobody would even bid on them. So we patched those up. We went to a neighbor and begged to rent 50 acres from him, told him that we couldn't pay him before we started farming that year. We would have to pay him at the end of the year, and that we might not even make it through the year. And if we did, we'd pay him double the rent. And we did without a lot of things, but we made sure he got his rent, and we can continue to still rent from that same family. But those trucks probably shouldn't even have been on the road. The license plates were invalid, and we mudded them over. And, some of them, we had one, we called it the 2-man truck. One person drove it, and the other person actually had to hold the roof on as you were going down the road. And but we did. We started back at farmers markets, and it was kind of where we had started, in the business early on. These are farmers markets like we visualize today. Interestingly enough, farmers markets today are at a historic high. In the 80s, farmers markets were at a historic low. My grandmother's generation were great cooks. My mother's generation, and I guess I will just speak for my mom, and I hope she doesn't hear this, but my mom is a terrible cook. My grandmother was an amazing cook. But, my mom's generation, my mom is 79. That generation, whatever their parents were doing wasn't cool anymore. And of course, that's that period. You remember the frozen TV dinners? Yeah. With the nasty green beans and the corn and the carrots, frozen carrots.
And the tray were bright blue.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The instant mashed potatoes and the Salisbury steak. We thought it was so cool that we could,
So this is what you grew up with, or at least your teenage years.
It was convenience food.
Yeah.
And, they weren't going to, my mother's generation wasn't going to waste all this time, cooking half a day. My grandmother would spend a half a day cooking for the family. And my mother's generation said there's more to life and I'm going to have a career. And so the convenience thing was great, but I think it went too far. And we took our eye off in America. We took our eye off. Where's the food coming from? What's the integrity of the food? Because it all became about the convenience factor. And that was good, but it went too far. And so we lost our way. And so in the last 30 to 35 years, and this isn't my numbers, these are, you can find these, in any medical records, a 3,000% increase in the last 40 years of kidney, liver, heart, cancer disease, attention deficit disorder, autism, childhood obesity, and allergies. I would be willing, I wouldn't bet the farm, but I'd be willing to make a gentleman's bet. There isn't any of your listeners that don't have one or more people in their immediate family or circle of friends that doesn't suffer from one or more of those diseases. It's not sustainable. It's not a 3,000% increase in 40 years. Now, 40 years may sound like a long time to somebody that's, 20 years old, but as a 58 or 59-year-old, life's short. And to see that kind of change in a dramatic fashion the wrong way is pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely. We will go back to this discussion about the connection between the way how people eat and health, and what you think about this. But let's go back to the situation that, so you guys you were selling back at the farmers markets, and then suddenly something happened that make now the connection with the world of chefs and change the picture for you guys.
Yeah, my dad was selling at the West Side Market in Cleveland. My brother was at Woodland and Orange in Cleveland, and my mother was at a flea market in Amherst, and my grandmother and aunt were selling out of the back of a Ford Fairmont at the Sandusky Farmers Market. And I was at East 152nd and Coit in Collinwood, which is east of Cleveland. And it's there that I met a woman, and she was a chef. We really knew nothing about chefs because our world wasn't about chefs. We just didn't, this lady had a white coat on, and she was knowledgeable and attractive, and she was a flirt, and I was 21 years old, and I actually dated her a couple of times, but I was way out of my league. She was very knowledgeable, but she took us under her wing in a very kind and gentle way, and she educated us. But she had trained in Europe, and she had seen a different world, and she said, I want you to grow for me products without chemical. I want you to grow products without synthetic fertilizers. I want you to grow for the flavor of the vegetable. And she said, I think that there would be enough chefs in America to support you if you'll do this. And she was looking for what she had experienced in France, and she couldn't find it here. Because if you remember Earl Butz, Secretary of Agriculture in the United States, his quote, his infamous quote, "Get big or get out," was the way that agriculture was going in the United States in the 70s. That is a quote that goes down in infamy, get big or get out. And so farms continue to take advantage of economy of scale. And of course, who's making the money? Pharmaceutical companies and the chemical companies. They saw a little window. They could go to farmers and say, hey, we can reduce your cost, because in the commodity world, the farmers have no control over the price that they get for the commodities that they produce. The only thing that they can do is try and maintain the costs of their products. So the chemical companies say, look, you won't have to plow. You won't have to cultivate. When you plant, you spray, you kill everything other than the genetically modified corn or soybeans or wheat, and you reduce costs, and they stay in business. And so that allowed us to begin to change the direction that we were going. And unfortunately, that's a very, very sad thing. Yields increased, price went down. It's all predicated by supply and demand. And so, here was this lady saying, let's go back to growing this for the flavor without the chemical, without the synthetics.
And then, so since then, there's a lot of famous chefs like Charlie Trotter and Thomas Keller, Daniel Boulud, Jean-Georges, José Andrés, and, André Zimmers, and, a lot of others that have worked, with you guys. I mean, can you share maybe an example to illustrate how you work with the chef, from start to finish?
Well, early on, Jean-Louis Paladin was a highly touted chef from France that came to the Watergate Hotel. And, he was very gregarious. He was very outspoken. Mm-hmm. He was not shy. And, basically his message was, your food is shit in America. If you want to grow for me, you must figure out how to grow. And a lot of...
I like your French accent.
Oh, thank you. Bonjour. So, and a lot of farmers were really doing quite well at that time. And so they're like, who the hell is this guy coming into our country telling us we need to know how to grow? And it really kind of was off-putting to a lot of people, but it really resonated. And in particular with my father, because what Iris Balin, that was that chef that was trained in France that met me at the farmer's market, who said, grow without the chemical, grow without the synthetic fertilizer, grow for the flavor. And then Jean-Louis saying, the way that you're growing in America is no good, grow for flavor. It resonated with my father because what he was suggesting had existed in America. We had just lost our way. And we moved away from that with the convenience factor, with production. Agriculture was what drove the economic engine in the United States. We could produce, and we still produce food. As it relates to our income, we produce food cheaper than any other country in the world as it relates to our income. Yet we have the highest healthcare. So yes, Jean-Louis, we heard him speak. We grabbed, literally around both of his ankles and said, we hear you. Now teach us. And Iris was the same. And then Jean-Louis was very different than other chefs. He recognized that, some chefs might say, well, look, I've got my own farmer. He can't produce enough for everybody. I'm going to keep him to myself. Jean-Louis knew that if he didn't give us enough business to keep us in business, that we couldn't do it. So he got on the phone and he called Daniel Boulud and Alain Ducasse and Jean-Georges von Richten, a lot of European chefs that had come to America, and said, look, this guy's willing to do it the way we want him to do it. We need to support you. We need to support Farmer Lee Jones at the Chef's Garden. And they did. And they took us under their wing, and they allowed us the existence and the ability to grow in the right way. Do we do everything right? No. Are we still learning? Yes. We're relearning what our great-grandparents knew intuitively. So they've really allowed us an existence over the last 37 years. And
so the idea was it was two things. It was like the way you were cultivating and the way that you were not using, all those chemical products and, that you were describing. And then at the same time, you were growing specific, I'm sure, like varieties, of vegetables and that the chef needed for their menus, correct?
Well, right. And the varieties, they didn't necessarily know what varieties, but what they were telling us was flavor and quality and consistency. And so what it meant for us, I mean, the very first thing that we grew for a chef was when Chef Iris Balin said, grow zucchini with blooms. And my dad had grown thousands of cases of zucchini, just like your listeners would visualize going to Whole Foods or going to a grocery store, and you get a 7 or 8 inch long cucumber that's 2.5 inches around, and they're all uniform, and you pack 20 pounds in a case. My dad was an expert zucchini grower. We shipped truckloads of them, but we knew that you waited till the bloom fell off, the zucchini was longer, and you picked it then. And here was this lady, with a chef's jacket on telling us she wanted the bloom. And I came home and told my dad about it and said, this lady's nuts. What's the matter with her? You don't eat the bloom. And I'm like, Dad, no, she wants the zucchini picked the size of your pinky and pick it when the bloom is wide open. And he said, just forget about it. She will never be back. She won't even remember the conversation. And he actually told this story on Business Unusual on CNN. And he said, and we usually didn't have conversations more than once. And he was talking about telling me to forget this lady, that she wouldn't be back. Well, I picked the zucchini with the blooms, exactly the size she described. And we took them in and she started screaming like someone had just stolen her purse. And she's like, oh my God, I haven't seen anything like this since I've been in Europe. This is amazing.
Exactly.
I can't believe it. And,
I was laughing because I'm laughing because, of course, it connects with my, my background being French and living in Provence. And obviously there's traditional recipes where you fill, the zucchini flowers. And this is a delicious dish. So, yes.
Well, and it goes back hundreds of years. It's not anything new.
Absolutely.
But I was, 21, 22 years old. All these other farmers came running over because they thought something was wrong. And all the other farmers are laughing at me, and I'm beet red, embarrassed because I have been called out. And they're like, what's the matter with you? Don't you know you picked a zucchini bigger than that? What's your problem? Why don't you take that and put it back on the plant and let it grow up? And she's like, no. This is and they're like, yeah, this lady's nuts. And so I came back home and I said, Dad, she loved them. And she gave me 50 cents a piece for them. And he reared back in his chair and he had his jaw dropped open. He said, well, just how many of them does she want? And so at that point, he said, okay, there's a market here that we don't understand. So that following winter and farmers, you tend to plan out your season in the winter and get ready for the next season. And so we asked her if we could buy some of her time. And of course, she knew we didn't have any money. But she said, I would love for you to come in. And we went in. She was actually a chef for a brokerage firm. There was this big, huge meeting table. It was intimidating and all these fancy chairs around it. And we set up a time and we loaded in our old pickup truck, 3 of us in the front seat of a pickup, and drove into Cleveland. And she had been there for an hour and a half before. She was so excited. And she had that table full of books marked to different pages for us. And man, we left there. We probably had 15 pages of notes. And so I guess to get back to your original question, they didn't know the specific varieties, but what they were communicating to us was flavor. So we did do the zucchini. We actually did trials on 50 varieties of zucchini to find the variety that had the best flavor, that had the best quality of flour, that would hold up the best. And so many of these, it's a way of life for us in experimentation and testing and tasting and, putting it in a refrigerated area like a chef would to see how well it holds up and what's the best packaging. But also, mostly and most important, the 3 most important things that we've heard from chefs over the last 37 years is flavor's most important. Second, flavor is second important. And third is flavor. And that's really what we've based every decision on, was the flavor and the integrity of the product and how it's grown.
And then 37 years after, and I would say before the crisis, so the current crisis with the pandemic, you are working with most of like the chefs and some of the big hotel chains like around the country, correct?
That's right. Marriott's, Four Seasons, St. Regis, Ritz-Carlton's. Absolutely. Because consistency, food safety, quality, they love to go to farmers markets, but they go to a farmers market on this Saturday. They get a product that they love. They take it in, they put it on a menu. Then they go back next Saturday and the farmer's son had a baseball game and they're not there that Saturday. And so now they don't have the product. So for us, consistency, the food safety, the consistency, the quality.
And you ship them in like 24 hours to them?
We don't pick it. The beauty of ours is, just like unlike a lot of companies that are sitting with warehouses with racks and everything's in inventory, our inventory is spread out over several hundred acres. And so we try and use technology that's available to us today that wasn't available to our grandparents. And we use handheld scanners, and we have growers that are responsible for different crops, and they download those inventories that then get downloaded into the computer in the office. And so when a chef calls and puts an order in, each product has a product code, and it creates what we call a pick list. So even before daylight, because we like to harvest very early in the morning at the lowest respiration rate of the day, the sun's been down all night and it's at its coolest point, and you pick. So we don't execute the harvest of the product until there's an order for the product. And so we bring it in, we wash it, we clean it, we pack it, we ship it, and the chef has it the next day. Unbelievable shelf life. They don't lose, there is no perishability to it because they don't waste it. Because if you go through the chefs allow us to defy traditional distribution systems. Traditional distribution system is that product's going to be 10 days to 2 weeks old by the time a chef gets it in a traditional distribution system. The chefs allow us, by working with us, to give us an opportunity to really defy that system and create our own.
The quality of the product starts with the quality, I guess, of the soil. And then so the idea is that you're doing like going back to the traditional ways that, you have a certain, number of acres that you cultivate, and then other parts of the land that is not cultivated, correct? And you do some rotations of culture. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? I'm probably not using the right terms.
No, that's okay. We're actually a very small farm. I think there's misconceptions because we've been around a while that we're a large corporation and we're a family farm. And we have 350 acres under management, which to a listener that doesn't maybe understand, that sounds like a lot. But we're surrounded by farms that are farming 3,000 to 5,000 acres to 10,000 acres. So in comparison, we're kind of like the flea on the end of the tail, on the end of the dog. We're very small. But to make it even smaller, 350 acres, 250 acres of that in any 1 year is harvesting the sun's energy. And that sounds a little bit odd, but here's how it works. And it's our personal belief, not trying to cast my aspersions on anyone else, but it's our personal belief that God designed a system far superior to anything we can fake out chemically or synthetically. It's about working in harmony with nature rather than trying to outsmart it. So just like if you were to go to the doctor, and I'm sure any of our listeners at some point has done this, but you get blood work done. And from that blood work, they can tell that you're high in iron, you're low in iron, you're high in calcium, you're low in calcium. They can read what's going on within your body. And we do the same thing with the soil. And even the commercial chemical growers do that. In fact, chemical companies will supply that service for farmers, and they'll do the soil test, they'll do an analysis, and then say what application of synthetic fertilizers needs to go on. That's where ours and theirs differ. So we do the soil analysis based on the deficiencies that we find within the soil. Then we plant crop specific. This is what's really cool. Based on the deficiency, we plant cover crops different types of plants will accept different types of energy from the sun. Buckwheat, clover, vetch, barley. We even have a 17 variety cover crop mix that we use to give us it would be like us taking a multivitamin. The plants accept different types of energy from the sun. So based on the deficiency in the soil, you plant crop specific. You let that land sit fallow and let the plants, and if you can visualize the leaves of that plant as antenna or receptacles, they accept the energy through the leaves, into the stems, then down to the roots, and then into the soil. Then the next year, when we plant the turnip or the beet or the carrot or the radish or the zucchini or whatever it happens to be, it picks that back up. And when we eat it, it builds our immune system. Here's how I kind of compare it. The way that we're farming chemically and commercially today is much like our Western culture of medicine. Once we get sick, then a doctor prescribes a penicillin or amoxicillin or a viacillin. It's always treating the symptom. I compare that method of farming with what we're trying to do today is more like the Eastern culture. The Eastern culture and the Eastern philosophy is get the body in balance to defend against the disease in the first place. So we have a saying, healthy soil, healthy vegetables, healthy people. So if we can harvest that energy and pull it down into the soil and then plant the crop, and it allows it to take those nutrients back up. And then when we consume them, it builds our immune systems. We're the most sterile environment in the world, and we're the most vulnerable. Everything's so clean, and we do things chemically and synthetically to control diseases. And, we have quite a mess going.
The future of the food and the way how we eat is definitely the big trend is now that everything is plant-based. The protein source, comes from plant versus meat. So do you think that this is something sustainable, the way the country is approaching farming today?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think that this virus has been devastating, and there's not any one of us that are immune from this. We have loved ones or we have friends that have been lost or are suffering from it. In some way, it's been devastating to all of us. I believe out of this devastation, out of the ashes of this horrible situation, there will be good things that will come of this. Part of the reason, and this is just a farmer's theory, part of the reason is because our immune systems are so compromised. I think that we've allowed disconnects in a lot of different ways. We've allowed disconnects with where our food sources are coming from. I think that people are reconnecting and more concerned. We're seeing people cooking. Oh my gosh, everybody's cooking. And it's wonderful for people to, kind of reimagine and reinvent, their stoves and getting intimate with their stoves and cooking. We all know, of course, about the toilet paper shortages, but I've even heard of flour shortages, which is kind of exciting to think about. But I think that there will be good that comes out of this. We have to be optimistic about this and say that there's something good that's going to come from this. And I think people are reconnecting with where food is coming from. I think that they're going to realize the importance of knowing who the grower is, where the food's coming from. So I think that, that's going to be positive.
And I mean, this is what you think is going to, change after the pandemic, because we see the change of people's behavior. And yes, knowing where the source of, what they're eating, coming from is becoming more and more important. But what would you personally would like to see change, after this pandemic crisis is over?
Yeah, well, so many different things. One of the things that I think is going to be positive out of this, of course, after the big war, World War II, the Victory Gardens, people planted gardens because resources were short and everybody planted gardens. And you know what? Kids do what their parents do. They want to emulate what their parents do. They emulate what they say. They emulate what they do. They emulate what's important to them. I believe that parents that are at home right now are interested and I believe there will be more gardens planted this year, perhaps than in the history of the United States. And
we see that on the Instagram already. You were talking about people cooking. There's more and more of this post.
Yeah.
And as well, there's more and more posts of people, growing or starting to prepare, let's say, their garden, and plant their own veggies. So, yeah.
But think about this. Think about how exciting this is. Those parents who are interested in planting a garden. Well, guess what? Joey and Susie want to be out there to help mom and dad plant the garden. If mom and dad are interested in planting the garden, the kids are going to be there planting a garden, and we are going to create a whole entire generation of gardeners, because once they garden as a child and they learn how fun that is, they understand that a carrot comes from the soil, and when they can go with mom and dad and harvest that and bring it in and cook it and then eat it and realize how good it is, and they have a connection with where the food's coming from and how it's grown and how much work it takes to grow it. Now we have got from 4 years old, from 3 years old on up, kids that are working with mom and dad and planting that garden. We've got a generation of gardeners. I think that in itself is a beautiful thing. Understanding where your food's coming from. And, I think that, that's just one thing out of many things that are going to happen. I think that we're going to see restaurants are going to present food in different ways. I think that there's going to be a lot of change. The goal is for us to understand where it's going. And for farmers, if we don't figure out how to adapt and change and understand where that market's going, you either adapt and change or you die. And, we're in the middle of having to figure that out, just like everybody else.
Exactly. You are in the middle of this pandemic, and then you decided to pivot your business, and you guys decided to emphasize like the delivery of your great produce like directly to consumers now.
That's right. We within 24 hours of really getting a full grasp of what was going on, 100% of our customer base was gone. Our revenue stopped coming in. You have a farm. You do not put a farm on furlough. It's kind of like a relationship. I'm going to refer to the farm in the female gender. She needs to be loved. She needs to be coddled and nurtured and tended to and cared for on a daily basis. You don't just flip the switch off and walk away and then say, okay, pandemic's over. We're going to come back and expect her to be, receiving you with open arms. You just can't walk away. And there's an intimacy with a farmer and her farm or their farm, because you have to love it and nurture it every day. And in addition to the fact that we had to pivot to be able to generate income, because everything that we do is by hand. We have 150 family team members. They're not all blood family, but they're family to us. There's 150 team members on our farm. And we had to figure out, we have a responsibility to those team members to keep them with income. So the pivot was to be able to go. We thought that it was an ethically responsible thing for our team members and for our farm, but also for people that needed healthy, nutritious, safe vegetables. In many cases, people don't have the availability. I was talking to a chef friend of mine, and he lives in a neighborhood in New York, and there's a line of an hour and a half to 2 hours. They only let 1 or 2 people in the store at a time to get groceries, and you're having to be exposed. This allows us to be able to harvest fresh product, to ship it directly to anybody, and it goes to their apartment or their front porch, and it goes direct from our farm to that individual. And they get a box that's, something that they can eat out of for 4 or 5 meals. And it's our goal. And I believe it's the most nutritious, best flavored vegetables that exist in America.
So let's talk about the site for instance, for the people that are listening. So they can go and see that on chefs-garden.com. And, then you have created like a series of boxes that anyone can order, as you said, and they will be delivered, to their doorstep in like 24 hours. Can you tell us more about how you guys came up with that decision and what is that you offer? In those different select, because you have 12 choices, of boxes in there.
Well, a couple of different things. We have felt like for several years that the health and wellness and nutritious vegetables were ultimately where we needed to go. It is our vision that within our lifetime that doctors will be recommending a parsnip rather than penicillin. We actually did a trademark on Farmacy, Farmacy. We haven't really done much with it yet, but you can kind of get an understanding of our thought process. We put a laboratory in 2 years ago. We have 5 scientists on staff. We are testing nutrient density. We have a lot yet to learn, but we're trying to understand what's working in our soil, in our seed selection, and our handling of the product. But, set aside from that, we're finding out some really interesting things and finding out what works and what doesn't work and how to affect the nutrition of the vegetable. No GMO, not voodoo. I'm talking about really getting an understanding. There's technology that we're using in this lab that isn't new technology, but it's new technology to measuring nutrient densities. There actually some technology from the forensic world. We're using centrifuges where we're breaking the products down and separating all of the different components and measuring those. We're measuring the gases off of a plant once we cook it and then measure the gas. But the idea is to be able to grow the most nutritious product that we can. We did a test the other day on carrots, and our carrots were testing 300 times higher in beta carotene than the USDA average. So the idea is to be able to really flesh out the most nutritious vegetables humanly possible and make them available at affordable price for individuals.
So you're doing this by combining varieties and as well, obviously the way you cultivate the vegetables, correct?
Right. And there's enormous amounts of research that's already been done where they're saying that if you consume things from the cruciferous family, arugulas, different combinations of vegetables will help you boost your immune system. There's a lot of research. This isn't our thought. This is research that's been done way previous to us. And so we've put combinations. We have an immune boosting box that has cruciferous greens in it, that has arugula in it, that has garlic in it, that has different things that the combination of things that we put in the immune boosting box, there's research and proof to show that these vegetables will help you build your immune system.
So what is on the anti-aging? I may have to order that one.
Right. So there's an anti-aging box. And again, I can't recite everything that's in each of these individual boxes, but we actually had the help of some doctors, Dr. Bob, and he has a location in Westlake and in Naples. And they approached us and they had heard about it. And these guys are hardcore serious about what they put in their bodies. And they came, they toured, they understood that we took them through the laboratory, and then we sent them home with some of the vegetables. And about 3 days later, they called and they're like, oh my God, we have sourced out the healthiest, the organic vegetables that we could find anywhere. And these are the best that we've ever tasted. And they could actually feel a difference in their energy levels. And they said, we want to make this product available to our customers, to their clients. And so they actually have it on their website and make it available. And this was before COVID. And so we said, well, then I think this is the direction we need to go to. And of course, so it was an easy thought process for us to make this pivot. There's a pick of the day, which is just a walk through our garden. We walk through the garden and what looks the very best today. And that's going to change. If we get 3 days of 60 degrees, we're going to be harvesting green and white and purple asparagus.
Asparagus, I'm waiting for that.
Yeah, so are we, and very anxiously. So, that pick of the day box is our walk through the garden and what looks the best today. And we're going to harvest that. We're going to package it and put it in a box, and we're going to send it to you, and you're going to have the pick of the day. So,
I received like the spinach, and I have to say, I haven't seen those spinach quality in a very long time. The way how thick those leaves, were, and the crunchiness aspect of it, and the way how, when you break them and so on, they were fantastic. I cannot judge about like the impact on my health, but I can judge the impact on what I put in my mouth, and definitely the taste of those spinach were fantastic. So,
oh my gosh! I mean, what you get
different.
What you get in the store in the plastic bags where it's grown in high volumes, it's shaped. The leaves are small; they're shaped like a spoon. There's absolutely no body to it, and it sits in your refrigerator for 3 to 4 days, and it starts to deteriorate, and you have to sort the yellow leaves out of it. This has got crunch and body and texture and flavor and vitamins in it. I mean, it's just full of health. It's actually a variety that we call ice spinach, the spinach that you got in your bag. And what we're harvesting right now to send out is spinach that we planted last fall. It freezes at night. It thaws during the day. It freezes at night. It thaws during the day. And ice spinach is based on the same concept as ice wine. They harvest a grape when it's frozen and it's at its highest sugar levels. We tested with a refractometer or a refractometer this spinach the other day. It's testing as sweet as a red delicious apple. That's a fact. It's measuring between a 10 and a 13 on a refractometer. Any of your listeners, it's a cheap investment for like $50 to $100. And of course you can pay even higher for better ones. For $50, you can buy a refractometer or refractometer. It measures Brix, B-R-I-X. I would encourage anybody that's really serious about food to buy one of these refractometers and have it at home. You can actually take it to a grocery store. If you got a pair of pliers or a vice grip, you take a leaf, you squeeze a little drop of it, and basically what it does is measures the amount of light density through the pulp, and it'll give you a reading and tell you the sweetness factor of it. Have you ever gotten a cantaloupe home and it's like, oh my God, there's no flavor? You can test the sugar levels on this stuff and find out what you've got.
Beside those boxes, you have a program at the moment which is on 5 weeks, which is the Small Farm Provisions. And this is collaboration with Chef Thomas Kellers and other chefs. Can you talk to us a little bit about those? I had mine boxes and they were mind-blowing.
Well, absolutely. We've been grateful. We've looked up to Thomas. Thomas, actually, we built a facility 20 years ago called the Culinary Vegetable Institute. Thomas Keller, Daniel Boulud, Alain Ducasse, Charlie Trotter, Jean-Georges Von Richten, Chef Ed Brown, all chefs that were mentors to me were on that advisory board to build the Culinary Vegetable Institute. And so they've been like big brothers to me or fathers to me in mentoring and taking us under the wing, because without them, and other chefs throughout the country, we wouldn't have existed and we wouldn't have had a chance to come back as a small family farm. But I reached out to Thomas early on in this pandemic and said, we're in trouble. All the restaurants are closed. We need help. And he came up with the idea, and I had just sent him a box like you received and said, could you do a shout out on your social media? And he said, sure, of course I can. And he did that. But then he called back a couple days later. He says, hey, I've got an idea. Keith Martin from Elysian Farms, Purebred Lamb, is in the same boat as you. All of his customers are chefs. He says, how about if we put together 5 chefs? And of course, Elysian Farms is small like us, and they can't process a lot of animal at one time. So each chef developed a recipe and a menu around a certain part of the lamb. So it gave Keith and his team in Pennsylvania time to be able to process one part of the animal. And then Thomas put together a menu with different vegetables and created a dinner recipe with one part of the animal and our vegetables. And then he pushed that out on his social. The next week, then it was Gavin Kaysen. And then, Chef
Corey Chow. Yeah.
Corey Chow, yeah. And then Tim Hollinsworth and then Daniel Boulud, each chef using a different part of the animal and different recipes with ours. So you can actually go online of each of those chefs and see their menu and watch them cook that dish. And then you can go online at Chef's Dash Garden and get the lamb. The lamb producer lives close enough to us that he brings those portions over. They're sealed and contained. They go in our box along with our vegetables, and you can get them delivered right to your door. It's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. I've cooked those in the past, different weekends, and the recipes are amazing. The quality of the produce are fantastic. So I encourage everyone to to order and test them. And do you think you will continue those, let's say, theme boxes, after those 5 weeks?
Absolutely. I think we will. Absolutely. We're going to be doing a Mother's Day gift for Mother's Day coming up, and it's going to have our vegetables and asparagus and our honey. And the edible flowers are certainly not selling right now because those more go in fine dining. So we've been harvesting them off or doing what we call deadheading, because if you don't pick the flowers off, then the plant goes down. So we have to pick those off. And we've been drying them, and we're actually partnering with Rod at Rare Tea Cellars out of Chicago, who's one of the foremost tea guys in the country. And we're doing a blend with our edible flowers and some of his amazing tea. And we're going to have tea in those. And it's going to be a nice Mother's Day gift box. So yes, I think we're going to do a vegetable and caviar pairing coming up. That's going to be kind of exciting. We're actually doing a partnership right now with a wine pairing with a company that's producing some amazing wine. And they did the pairings with the vegetables and the wine. So I think it's limitless. It's up to limited by only our imagination.
So, I mean, this pandemic in some sort has opened the door for maybe like different opportunities, for you guys, even if I understand the situation is really bad at the moment. I'm thinking that you probably will continue this home delivery business when we will return to whatever is like the new norm.
We will. This is not going to go away when the restaurants come back. We're developing a new marketing channel. We want a relationship with the end user. And I think that the end user wants to know where the food's coming from. And we hope that they work with other small farms like us that are suffering and struggling out there and reconnect and get to your farmers markets. We encourage that. We know we're not the only answer, but we think that maybe we're part of the solution. And we'd like to be a small part of every listener's future culinary life. And yeah, I think that it does open doors. We've had conversations and turned over rocks and had discussions with people we never dreamed of having before the pandemic. And, out of the ashes of this horrible pandemic, there will be things that will occur that will be good. And the new norm is going to look different than the norm in the past.
Yeah, and everyone should go and at least try to get one of your books on chefs-garden.com. Absolutely. That's something that they should be doing. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the Culinary Vegetable Institute? What's the mission of this institute?
Well, the Culinary Vegetable Institute's initial vision was a place for the foremost chefs in the country to be able to come and to do experimentation and research and to be able to play. It's an R&D lab. We have relationships with culinary equipment companies that have the best of the best and the newest ideas, from centrifuges. It's just unbelievable. And our chef Jamie Simpson over there.
Farm, right? It's on the farm.
It's on
the
farm. Yeah. Okay. We have about 600 visiting chefs a year. Grant Achatz brought his entire opening team before they opened Alinea in Chicago and spent 3 days doing menu development and playing with ingredients. And then 7 years later, Curtis Duffy, who was on Grant's opening team, came with his opening team from Grace. And he's planning his next trip back because he'll be opening Ever pretty soon. But the idea was originally for chefs to be able to come. It's evolved into a place where we do corporate R&D and corporate retreats. We had Barilla Pasta brought 16 of their corporate chefs, like the corporate chef from TGI Fridays, the corporate chef from Macaroni Grill, corporate chefs that are customers that are big users of pasta. And they came out, they toured the farm, they worked together, and they cooked and experimented with all these different ways that pasta could be used. So corporations come and bring their guests as what most of them usually did for many years was go out to Greystone and then tour the Napa Valley. There's only so many times you want to do that. And so this really gives corporations an alternative to be able to come. And it's kind of nice, they kind of have a captive audience because, you're out in the farm. And so they're not wandering off into a bar or some other thing. They're focused on really building the relationships. It's about relationship building and learning different ways to be able to use ingredients. So
And do you think you're going to have the Root conference in September this year? Do you think it's going to be possible?
I don't know.
You don't know yet.
That's a burning question right now. Yeah. I don't know. We hope to. I don't know. I really don't know.
Can you tell us a little bit what the conference is for the listener?
The conference, yep. This will be our 5th year. We skipped last year because we were in the middle of a contract with a book that we agreed to do. It's about right now about an 800-page book on everything you could imagine about vegetable. It's designed to be the authority on vegetable in America. It is a great resource book for anybody that has any interest in anything from gardening to cooking.
That's for 2021, correct? The book.
That's going to come out in spring of 2021, right?
Okay.
But the Roots Conference is to bring the shakers, the movers, the thinkers, the things that haven't even really made mainstream yet. That guys are out there, ladies and gentlemen are out there doing things that they're meaningful to them, they're passionate about, they're innovative, cutting edge ideas, Native American cuisine. We did that 4 or 5 years ago. It's kind of hitting center stage now and preserving these varietals. So crickets, we did crickets 5 years ago, and it's one of the most nutritious things that you can consume. You can grind it into a flour and it's got more protein in it than any meat that you can consume. It has the potential to save third world countries. So it's things that people are doing or working on or considering. And then the networking of somebody talking, to somebody else. It's like, oh, you're working on that? I've been working on it. Here's what I found. The networking is worth the price of admission. And it's a 2-day event. You come out, you're on the farm, you share ideas, and we have speakers, and it's just an amazing day and a half, great speakers and networking.
Okay, so hope that you cross the fingers that you can have it, this year. So, Farmer Lee Jones, we have been talking for about almost an hour, and I would like to give you back your freedom. But before that, would you mind answering a series of rapid-fire questions?
Okay, sure.
Are you okay with that? So, I'm curious. Do you cook yourself?
I do.
Okay. So, what do you like to make? What's your favorite recipe?
I'm the king of leftovers. Whatever's in the fridge.
That's important
I'm the king
now.
Of leftovers. Yeah. And my son and my wife always joke about that I'm the king of leftovers. So I always take whatever's left over and I create something new out of whatever's there. And I love to
so
come
what
up
have you
with
made
a new
recently?
dish.
What have you made recently with leftovers?
Oh my gosh. You know what? Everything blurs together. All the meals blur together.
I put you on the spot here.
Yeah, you did.
Okay. So nothing specific come to mind. Okay.
No.
So
no.
What's your favorite guilty pleasure food?
Well, I had some, my sister made buttermilk pie and I had it for breakfast this morning. And my aunt's recipe, my grandmother's recipe, my grandma's gone, but my aunt makes the most amazing peanut butter chocolate fudge.
Wow. That sounds fantastic. Yes. From everything that you have done with chefs and all the requests that you receive, can you remember maybe what one of your favorite chef requests you got?
Oh my gosh, there's been so many. I mean, a chef in New York City asked me to send him a Christmas tree one time. I mean, we have done everything. Early on, we don't do it anymore for food safety, but a chef requested live turkeys. And this was when we were still delivering with our trucks. And I have a picture with a turkey and I have it in a crate and its head sticking up out through the crate. And I've got the crate closed with duct tape. And so I delivered live turkeys and live ducks to this chef in Columbus. And he opened the box and one of the ducks flew out and took off to a nearby pond. And so we lost that duck. So, I mean, chefs have been they've been so great to us and they've asked us to do things for them. And we've been grateful for the opportunity to be a small part of their teams. And we love chefs.
What is beside like the rooster and the Christmas tree, the stranger things that you have cultivated? I mean, not that you have cultivated, obviously, the turkey, but anything.
Well, a lot of times it's looking at a plant in a different way than we've ever considered it. There's kind of the traditional norms that we have an expectation of things at a certain size or a certain stage. And we have a saying on the farm, and the chefs really helped us develop that thought process, is that at every single stage of a plant's life, it offers something unique to the plate. I don't know if you've had a garden and a radish is shot what they call a seed stalk. Once it shoots a seed stalk, it goes to bloom because the goal of a plant is to produce a mature seed. And once it shoots a seed stalk, the radish is no longer good to take to market. The radish becomes pithy and hollow, but it's got this enormous stalk with all these amazing blooms. And the cruciferous do the same thing. And we were plowing under a field because it had shot a seed stalk. And I had the chef in the truck with me, and my brother was plowing the field under, and he jumps out of the truck before it's even stopped. And he runs in front of the tractor and waves him down. He's like, "Why are you plowing this under?" And he got out and he tasted it. And he's like, "Do you realize what I can do with this on the plate?" And it was kale that had gone to bloom, a beautiful bright yellow flower that adds amazing flavor to a stir fry or any dish that you can imagine. So looking at those plants in a different way than we've maybe traditionally considered them, I think is exciting. The root of a garlic. We pulled the garlic up and saw the root, and we now harvest the root. And it's one of our most popular things is the garlic root. So really looking at that plant differently.
And the final one, what frustrates you the most in the farming industry today?
You know what? Frustrations are small things. Because you have to be an internal optimist on the farm. One of my personal things is that I have a saying, when asparagus is in season, we should consume it 3 times a day. When it's out of season, we should lust for it for 10 more months. Mother Nature provides such a natural rhythm to what we should be consuming at any one time. Allow Mother Nature to dictate what your menus are. For me, and I think it's gotten much better in the last 5 years, for chefs to understand what's in season. What frustrates me is seeing asparagus coming in from Peru or Chile or Ecuador when it's out of season. And then when it's in season, it's not celebrated. Celebrate Mother Nature's seasons. There's a natural rhythm. And our bodies, if we'll really get in tune with our bodies and listen to our bodies will crave certain foods. And your body, I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where there's times where I just need kale or I need beets. There's certain minerals or components within those foods that your body is telling you need. And Mother Nature will provide that. Yeah. I mean, it's just be in tune with your body, be in tune with Mother Nature. You know, I always like to take anything, a problem or a frustration, and turn it into an opportunity. So I would say my biggest opportunity rather than frustration is that there's an opportunity for people to have a better understanding of when food is in season and how to celebrate that.
I think that we should finish with those words, Farmer Lee Jones. And I have to say that I appreciate, and I can tell that we're on a farm. I can hear the rooster in the background. That reminds me a lot of my youth, in the northeast part of France with a little village when there was a lot of farms as well. So thank you so much for being a guest, on the show. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to receive my next box here in New Jersey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening today. If you liked this episode with Farmer Lee Jones from The Chef's Garden, please share it with a friend or a colleague. Word of mouth goes a long way, and I love to welcome new listeners to the show. If you want to learn more about what we talked about today, visit our website, flavorsunknown.com. In 2 weeks, my guest will be artisan baker Matthew Cabon from Magnol Bakery in Houston. We will talk about bread and croissants. I see you in 2 weeks, and until then, remember that people who love to eat are always the best people.
You've just enjoyed another delicious episode of Flavors Unknown. Hungry for more? Hit subscribe. Tell us where you're listening from by leaving a review. And for social media and show notes, head to flavorsunknown.com.